Good morning. I'm happy to be here at the Snowy Owl Theater. I want to thank Icicle Creek Center for the Arts for allowing me to have this conversation this morning with Marlin Peterson, who I have to confess, I have taken several workshops and a class last fall in scientific illustration from. So I'm really pleased that Marlin agreed to talk to me today about his life and his work for this Icicle Creek Artist Talk series. So welcome, Marlin.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate
you're welcome. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this. Well, I'd like to talk first about how you became an artist. And when we talked before, you talked some about doing art growing up and then doing less art, but then when you took up traveling and photography, that you got back into art. Would you talk about those early years a little bit?
I was really into art as a kid, and was fortunate to have a mom that would drop me off at private art lessons that I took weekly for years of my life. And so I got to experiment with a lot of different media and do things I wouldn't normally done. We didn't really have much of or any art program in my elementary school, so I had that going for me. And I was just really, I just found a lot of fun cartooning, doing caricatures of my teachers and of dinosaurs and snakes and things like that. And I continued on, and when I was in high school, I did editorial cartoons for the newspaper, and that led to wanting to pursue it even more. I took AP art in high school. I did go to university, but I, for some reason, wanted to major in history. I love history, but I did take a few art classes, but I was a little bit turned off by them there. And I don't know exactly why. I had some instructors that maybe pushed us in different ways that I didn't really want to go, or it's hard to remember that long ago, like what really turned me off toward it. But I kind of just let it fall by the wayside for a few years. Then I started to travel, and the first trip I took was a bike touring trip out of the country to Southeast Asia, and I didn't even have a camera. I had no way to I didn't have a journal. I was just traveling, which is, I guess traveling in its purest sense. But I started to really want to remember things where I had traveled, and so I borrowed a camera from a friend that I had met out on the road, and I started to take pictures of things. Years later, I was still into traveling, and I started to get more of a developed camera, and then I discovered 3D photography, and then I discovered 3D macro photography, and simultaneously I started to travel to a lot of tropical countries, which, as you know, the diversity in vertebrates and birds and animals is just crazy, and so I was always camping to make it affordable, so I'd be camping in the tropics, in the jungle. And at night, I would just take my headlamp out and just go look at bugs and things. And so I really wanted to record that because I was seeing these amazing things. And so through doing lots of photography, I ended up doing lots of slideshows for libraries and universities and stuff about traveling. And it was wanting to understand more about the natural world and these amazing places that I would visit in the tropics specifically. That got me back into thinking about pursuing art, but I had sort of heard that, there's this, there's science art. There's this thing where you do art, but it's different than photography. Photography can capture certain things, and I knew the limits of photography because certain things I just couldn't capture. Especially the inside of an insect or something like that. So I found out there was a program. And I just started sketching, doing more travel sketching, and realized hey, I still had enough skills, I guess. I thought hey, maybe I could pursue this as a goal. So I applied and I got into a scientific illustration program, and that got me back into art pretty much. And then from there, I wound up teaching at Wenatchee Valley College and becoming an illustration instructor. And then I started doing a lot more cartooning and things like I used to do when I was a kid. And so now I do all illustration types. My formal training is in science illustration, but I do logos and cartoons and editorial cartoons and just anything any client wants. And so,
Yeah, I really like that.
That's my
So-
whole trajectory there.
In a way, well, I appreciate that. So in a way, it's kind of full circle. I mean, back to this cartooning as a kid, but then also enhanced and driven by this immersion and experience in the natural world.
Yeah.
And a desire to explore it in different ways, not just as a tourist, but to really delve into, as you say, all the way to the inside of something, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Or with the class that you took, the science illustration class, a camera can't capture what a dinosaur looks like, and so you need a science illustrator or what a planet looks like exploding, millions of miles away. You need an illustrator for that kind of thing. You just can't capture with a camera. So it's fun to be part of that.
It is
imagery.
fun to be part of that. I can attest to that. So let's talk about that. I have a question about the dinosaurs, because one of the things you did in our class was it made it seem like to me that dinosaurs were relevant to our lives today, and that an artist could work and discover and render that extinct animal. Would you talk about the process for that? I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, you're talking about non-avian dinosaurs, right?
Yes.
Just kidding. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize dinosaurs live amongst us today, and they're every bit as fascinating as the dinosaurs that existed way back when. Mm-hmm. But it's funny. We had chatted about this before. I'd hardly rendered any dinosaurs before maybe a year ago, when we had that fall class, because I was even more interested in extinct mammals and extinct creatures that lived just after most of the dinosaurs died out. But there's just so many fascinating aspects of the natural world. A lot of people just don't realize. It takes someone who can create that imagery to make it accessible to the general public. Somebody that can. I remember just being utterly enthralled by. I can remember specific paintings of dinosaurs as a kid. I could still remember them because they just entranced me in a way that a description can't. Mm-hmm. It's just a beautifully rendered illustration of a bygone era is just an amazing thing to behold. And so, it feels present. We're surrounded here in Wenatchee and Leavenworth by amazing geology, and it's just to think about what the world used to look like back then, and some of the creatures that inhabited right here is just amazing. And so, I've really loved doing the scientific reconstruction of that.
I loved learning about that because to me it seemed so relevant, the underlying message about the earth and really fundamentally conservation.
Yeah.
Thinking about conservation now and who's here now and who isn't here, that kind of thing. Whether, there are a lot of species that are threatened now, and it just makes me contemplate them in a new way to illustrate them and think about that. And I think it makes other people think about it too. I mean, that's one of the things I most enjoyed about your class. I felt like you taught me a lot of artistic techniques and things like that, and things about perspective. But then also you taught me kind of a different way of seeing and communicating. And I really appreciated that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and on that note too, it's interesting. I have a 5 and a 3-year-old now, but my 5-year-old is really inquisitive, and we talk about a lot of things. But to try to describe things that don't exist anymore, or states of the world, he's really into dinosaurs, of course. But just to contemplate geologic time, I think a lot of people don't comprehend how much time we're talking about when you talk about geologic time, and how long ago the Earth, how long the Earth has been here, but how many different phases the Earth has gone through, and it's so long ago to even grasp. I still have trouble grasping it, but yeah, if for nothing else, studying dinosaurs and extinct creatures, just to appreciate how much time we're talking about.
Yeah. No, I really opened my eyes. You know, and I did take a look at your website before this interview, and I looked at all those media that you work in. You describing yourself as a freelance illustrator on the website. I know you've done books and magazines and branding for companies and murals. But we talked earlier now about the class you're teaching now in doing murals, and I'd like to know what it is about making murals and people seeing them that appeals to you.
Yeah, I guess murals are my most, they're my favorite medium right now. I've always loved making my work bigger and bigger. And I remember back in my illustration program, I would always kind of push the limits of how large I could create pieces. And murals are just a natural extension of just trying to go as large as possible. We're really surrounded, if you go to other cities, there's murals everywhere. And here we are in the Wenatchee Valley, we have huge, perfect, flat walls. And so I just see all this ripe, low-hanging fruit everywhere. So, this class I'm teaching now, I was really lucky to kind of transform my illustration class generally in the spring. This is my 5th year of working with big art as a theme for spring illustration. Every fall has been scientific illustration, winter, screen printing illustration generally as a focus. And then, in the spring, large. And there was a building on Wenatchee Valley College's campus that was going to be torn down, and that was how we got permission to just mural all over the outside and inside of it. And that allowed a lot of people to see that, it's actually great to have art around rather than just flat walls. And for me as well, I just love looking at, even if it's just colors and just random non-representational graphics, it's just a neat thing to look at. And so having that opportunity has now led to the college allowing us to do murals on permanent buildings on campus, not just things that are imminently going to be demolished in a few weeks. So we've got that going for us. But it's an amazing opportunity. With the murals, I've reached out, when I lived in Seattle and other places to try to do murals on walls, and the building owners oftentimes reluctant. They want really a firm grasp on what's exactly going to be there and what are the colors going to be, and that's understandable. But all that to say, the hardest part about muraling is getting permission. The paint isn't even that expensive. Your labor, your time, that's worth a lot and whatnot. But just getting permission. So it's a really rare opportunity, and I try to stress it with the students that we have permission to just paint on walls and just get practice and work really large. And so most of my students haven't done anything larger than, say, 2 feet, and to just take that and expand it to 20 feet is just an amazing thing for them to be able to scale up their artwork. So for right now, I wore, I don't know if you could see it in the camera, I wore my favorite mural pants that I've worn. Every mural I've done has a little part of it here, and I've replaced the knee pads multiple times, and because I kneel down on the ground and do things. But muraling's my favorite thing right now for sure, because it's whatever you want it to be. I've done murals that depicted like salmon life cycle, for example. So scientific illustration in the form of a mural. Mm-hmm. Now I'm doing just, a mural that's just of a purple deer that's just random, just kind of a random surreal kind of illustration. I've done graphics, 3D graphics, species that are much smaller that are made to look like optical illusions. So within muraling, you can do every possible art form as well. So it's just bigger. So that's what I love about it so much.
So I saw that you've done murals all over the country, really. You've done them in Austin, Texas. You've done them in Ohio. You've got a pretty, what I consider to be a famous one, an iconic one in Seattle that you'll see, anybody can see, if they go up to the top of the Space Needle.
You got to pay for the elevator ride, yep.
Yes, you do.
It's worth it, though.
And how did you choose that subject for that venue?
The subject, I actually brought in my original model here. So it's we'll call it a harvestman, or I grew up calling this a daddy long legs, and or an Apilionis. It's a type of arachnid. I really wanted the 3D effect to be, to make it look convincingly 3D, even though it was two-dimensional painting on a roof. And the fact that the body sits so far above the substrate that it's standing on, the cast shadow and all the cast shadow of the legs would really suggest 3D. You know, if I had a slug or something, you know, that's just like on the surface, there's no shadow to show the dimension. And so this being so, the body, I just love Opiliones bodies. And the fact that it's this far above the surface really makes a convincing effect. So that's why I chose these. I chose a male and a female non-native species of Opiliones to depict. And as far as the place I chose to do it, I kind of like I was talking about before, I was living in Seattle at the time, and I'd gotten a grant to do a mural that I had just did a quick Photoshop rendering of, you know, some harvestmen on a wall. And I traveled all over Seattle for weeks, just trying to find who's the building manager, who's the building owner. What's their email address? I want to send them an email, give them a description and a quick rendering on their wall, what it might look like. No bites, just no one was interested at all. So I would just scan Google Earth, and one day I was scanning Google Earth and I realized, hey, wait, there's the Space Needle's there, and the point of the Space Needle is to look down, is to look all around. And what do you know? I grew up going to the center house, now it's called the Armory, but it was perfect roof just right below the Space Needle. And I hadn't had any experience. It was a really rough surface, and there's bird poop all over it, and it's just these little gravel bits and asphalt and things. And I didn't even really know if the paint would adhere that well, so I had to clean it up a lot. But ultimately, it was just a big open canvas that wasn't being used. And so I reached out to them, and it happened to be the 50th anniversary of the Space Needle and of Seattle Center from the World's Fair in 1962. And so I was kind of piggybacked onto that, and they gave me permission and painted on there. So.
Well, it's a great one, and I do want to tell you, a friend of mine flew in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin last summer and came to my house and talked to me about these incredible sculptures that she had seen on top of that roof. And I said, well, that's a mural. I mean, I know who painted that. And she didn't believe me.
That's so funny. Yeah, I've ridden with the elevator a couple times with people that were trying to convince their family members, no, it's not a painting. This is like a real sculpture.
Isn't that terrific? And
Yeah.
that was like more
That's
than
when I
10
knew I did
years
my
ago,
job.
right? More
Yeah.
than 10 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's lasting.
It's lasting. I've touched it up once, but yeah, the birds up there are just crap everywhere.
Okay.
And it's just, yeah, I need to go touch it up again.
Well,
It's still visible though, but when I painted it, it was crystal clear, and the shadow was just right. I spent a lot of time with color swatches trying to figure out what is the right shadow color, and it ended up being kind of like this bluish gray color. And I was really, I put a lot of effort into finding the shadow color, but right when I'd painted it, it looked really, it was convincing.
well, I want to tell you, I think it's still convincing people, even in its slightly degraded state.
Yeah.
So good.
And so hopefully the dream is just get more opportunities like that, because those are really large, and there's not a lot of just giant roofs out there, but I'm seeking them out. But this sculpture would have worked. This 3D painting or anamorphic painting would work just as well on a big wall too. And so I'm always looking for big walls to do as well.
One thing that occurred to me this morning when I was thinking about these murals and your focus on murals is I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the differences you perceive between graffiti, a mural, and a huge painting in a museum, like by Picasso or something, Picasso's Guernica.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the similarities and differences? I mean, do you see a connection between all those things? And do you see differences?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Yeah, definitely. There's similarities in everything. Artists expressing themselves in some cases without permission, like people that do, graffiti writers. on the side of trains. A lot of times they're practicing, but a lot of times they're really investing a lot of their time, and there's just a blank canvas there, sitting there on the side of a train or in the side of a building, but they don't necessarily have permission. They have to work in the darkness of night, and maybe they'll get charged with a crime if they get caught, you know? And other people doing gigantic paintings, you know, maybe they have a benefactor or somebody that's going to purchase it. And then there's murals that, that usually have permission and maybe a budget to do it. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people just use the word graffiti for anything that's on a wall. I really don't use that word much, though. You know, I've started to use the word street art more, and that seems to encompass both things with permission and things that don't have permission. Some of my favorite street art is just tiny little paintings on a grate, you know, in the middle of a street or a speed bump or, you know, a railing or something like that. That's all I consider in the realm of street art. But yeah, I think the vocabulary is changing about it as people respect it more, because some of the street art I've seen out in the world has been some of the most impressive art I've ever seen. You know, I've been to a lot of museums. I really love museums. I go any chance I get. But I feel like the most profound awe I've had from artwork has been with murals and just gigantic street art that I've seen. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think they all have different intents with these three examples that you brought up. You know, the artist might have different intents for why they create it. But yeah, I think that now people are starting to respect all art they see, anything they see, whether it's on a building or a train or a grade or in a museum. And they see it in a similar light now. It's just a beautiful thing that an artist created. It doesn't matter. You know, you don't have to check. You don't have to wait until you get into a museum to appreciate something. Because on the way to the museum, there's probably going to be all kinds of cool murals on the way. So
I feel like murals that I'm encountering daily in Wenatchee now, some of which are painted by you, some of which are painted by your students. So it's like, to me, you have like this school of art now on the side of the YMCA building and the
great mural there.
Collapsed Gallery. Yeah. And then at Centennial Park with your environmental piece. And also, I love the piece at Kiwanis Methow Park. Is that the other one where you said I had an article I read, it said that you went around and talked to the neighbors about color choice and things like that, you know? And you decided to use two colors, and it's really quite striking and vibrant, I'd say, visually. But it's of birds, neotropical migrants.
Yeah. Birds that migrate in and out of Wenatchee Valley. And again, it was kind of an educational piece, because I think a lot of people don't realize that some of these birds that they watch all the time throughout the summer don't live there in the winter. They leave and they go somewhere else and they come back. So just that little piece alone will allow people to maybe start to get interested in just the natural world around them and all the nuances of these little creatures that they sort of take for granted, realizing that they take massive journeys, or in the case of invertebrates, they have these amazing lifestyles that hopefully they can appreciate when they start to look into it. So
You mentioned to me that with a mural, something outside, some public art like that a person, in a way, doesn't choose to look at that the person, you know, it's a little bit confrontational. I mean, you can't help but look at it.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it might sound like a cliche, but you know, street art or murals, you know, it's a democratizing art form, because it's really cheap to get. If you choose to work with aerosol or spray paint, you know, it's maybe $7 for a can of spray paint, or just little samples of a quart or a gallon of paint. It's not that much money, but anyone can do it if they, you know, whether or not they have permission. But it's actually pretty easy to paint a mural somewhere, and so it just opens it up for more people to just have a say in what we look at all around us. It's not just there's a lot of things that I look at, murals painted out there that I don't necessarily care for, but other things that just blow me away. And as somebody who just goes out in public now after COVID starting to wind down, we have to look at everything. So it's just really neat that more people can take an active role in creating art and colors that we see in and around the city.
But I also perceive that there's a place for all the background and training that you have that underlie this mural production that you do. I mean, I was able to watch you the other night working on this latest mural that you're working on, and I saw you using some of the techniques about depth and perspective that I learned in your class last fall in creating this wonderful imaginary deer with his rider. And so it's not as far removed from what I think of as traditional art in a way as it might be. There's still a great place for perspective and artistic skills and color theory, all those things you're still working with on this massive scale.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can't even list off all the different little techniques. And being an instructor at the college, I practice all the time. I work with my students on projects, and I hone my skills when I'm teaching different examples, for example, of perspective, or working with color, or working with light or shadow and things. And so all those things come into play. And it's like I think some people have this perception that everything's just easier if you do it on a computer, like the computer kind of does it for you. But artists that create digital art, they're legitimate artists that could easily just paint or render things in ink. The computer is just a tool that they use.
I want you to talk more about that, because that is one of the things I wanted to bring up about this. So, I know you're comfortable in both kinds of media, traditional media of lots of different kinds and digital media, and you use that as part of your teaching in class. And even people who aren't specially digital, you draw them into that on a certain level, and you certainly make more complex programs available to people with your teaching about that. But I'd like for you to talk a little bit about marrying those two styles, the old and the new kind of things, and what advantage that gives you as an artist.
Yeah, when I started off, I had absolutely no digital skill. I hardly knew how to use a computer in like the early 2000s. And I remember trying to take a Photoshop class at Western Washington University, and kind of being, I was on the wait list, but I sort of being outed by the instructor saying, wait, you have no Photoshop experience at all. You can't even take this class. So, wasn't even allowed. So it actually delayed my learning the program for quite a while. It was rough. It was really difficult to the learning curve to start learning that, but it's such a powerful program. And a lot of people can use it in just a real casual, minimalistic appendage to what they do for their own art. But now I instruct in Photoshop, and it is important enough. At the college, not everyone has access to a computer or to programs like Photoshop, and so I can't teach just a digital illustration class. But I always show my students and try to explain to them all the different ways that it can speed up what I do, or especially how you can render something and take chances, follow it out a certain trajectory for a ways and realize, okay, this isn't working out, and then just, okay, Control Z, or just get rid of that layer and try another path, or just try another way of doing things, or try coloring and different ways of composition. It's so quick and easy to do on the computer without the commitment. You don't just figure things out necessarily on the wall. You want to figure it out before you get there, so you have a plan before you go up on the wall. So, for example, my mural students now, we're going to be doing a formal submission, and they're going to take their artwork and they're going to Photoshop it onto a wall as if they're going to be submitting this to an actual client or a building owner. Because, like it or not, any building owner is going to want to know, what is it going to look like on the wall? And so just that one little tool within Photoshop, and there's thousands of little tools like this, but just that one thing where you can transform an image and put it onto a wall is just, it just brings you to another level of being able to achieve what you intend to. And that goes for all kinds of things. I've done, for example, this shirt, I remember I did it in Scratchboard, but then later I touched it up digitally because there were some areas were just a little unclear and the scan wasn't that good. And so I'm always encouraging students to just take their artwork where possible, those that can, and modify things or try things out. Even sketching on the computer, just before you take it to the final piece of paper or whatever it is, and experimenting digitally is just a great way to go. So yeah, I think I probably do the majority of illustration work that I do for my job digitally. It's just a little faster. I do graphics for a magazine. I do lots of things that I render digitally because it's a little bit cleaner and it's a little more predictable in a lot of ways. And so there's nothing like the feel of actually painting and just paint or pencil or pen on a piece of paper. It's kind of like reading a physical book. Getting a Kindle or something like that isn't quite the same experience. And same with art. But so I think, to pay the bills and to do things I do, I work more digitally, but I think I prefer to work with traditional media more. But it's kind of that dilemma.
Well, certainly I appreciated learning from you about the ways that working digitally, even if it's just a little bit, can enhance the artwork that you're trying to do as a, pen and paper kind of artist. It really opened my eyes to the merits of each way, it became very apparent. Also, I did really like the emphasis in your class about always talking to us often about how the artwork we were creating, how these skills could be employed in work that we could be commissioned to do. It was really exciting. It made me go and look at my own artwork in a different way. For instance, I am wearing a T-shirt I had created this year from a pen and scratchboard project I did with you in one of the workshops. It was really great. And it's been very well received. And so it was kind of a fun way, a different way to get my artwork out there and have people experience and live with art, to have it on a T-shirt or have it on I made some tea towels also that I gave to people that I didn't know their size of T-shirts. So it's good.
And I do try to touch on that with my students all the time, especially in the mural class, especially in the illustration class, not as much in the drawing class that I regularly teach, but I always tell them, you can do the bare minimum and you can get a decent grade on this assignment, but you always got to be thinking about your portfolio. And a lot of these, I have some students in this quarter's mural class that are just taking it. They're just really grabbing this opportunity and really creating great murals for their portfolio. And because in the end, the fact that I had a degree in science illustration, it doesn't matter as much as just having strong pieces in your portfolio. So always trying to get my students and myself, there's a lot of things I've rendered, a lot of illustrations I've made that maybe ultimately weren't chosen by the client, but they're strong enough to go in their portfolio. And so I'm always trying to stress that to students, like, get your pieces, clean them up digitally, get them in your portfolio, because they're always going to help you get work in the future. And, especially if that's everybody's going to sort of start to work their way into a certain theme or a certain media they like. And so they need to build up a stockpile of illustrations.
You were also really good at somehow you reduced anxiety about art in class. you made it a very collaborative experience, the journey that we were taking among the classmates. You had us talk about each other's work often, every week, but in a way that didn't feel like it could hurt your feelings, like your thing wasn't perfect. It was more like looking at it and, as you say, taking it to the next level or making it, what you could do to tweak it to make it even more appealing or something like that. I mean, I like that you could make a community like that and have it be so helpful and not negatively emotional,
All that on Zoom. Wow.
Yeah, you did. I really appreciated that. I mean,
It's better in person for sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I'd like to take it again in person. Yeah.
yeah. But that is an amazing part of being in a class. I mean, you can go on YouTube and you can find a video for any technique and how to render anything. And I really use YouTube a lot. I recommend it to my students. But anyone can do that. But to be in a community of students where people are struggling with the same issues, or they're using the same media, and it's just, there's no substitute for that, to be, struggling together with a similar outcome, working on similar subjects, or like I said, different, the same media. And I think I do try to build up, we just play with it, play with the media. I don't know, in the science illustration class that you were in, I don't know, maybe we did 8 different media throughout the quarter. And but just having kind of play days where we just sort of just start playing with the brush or playing with the ink and whatnot, and then start to feel the properties of it, and then work up to a more of a formal illustration. It's a good way to just start casually.
Well, it really worked for me. What about working as a commissioned artist? Do you enjoy that?
Yeah, I do. I just feel grateful every day that I can just be an artist and make a living, a meager living as an artist. Just to be paid at all, and to do art, being paid for it is an amazing thing. It's not everybody can do that. A lot of people do art, but can't make a living from it, and so I just feel really lucky I'm able to do that. I think part of that is being really versatile. I use a lot of different media, and like I said, I'm comfortable in the digital realm and the traditional realm. I like to do murals, but also real tiny types of pen work, and so whatever a client needs, I generally can do, but I have to be open to that.
You do.
So,
yeah. I mean, there'd be some people who, with artistic talent and skill that they've developed over time, they might prefer just to be in a studio doing what they want to do, expressing your vision, interpreting the world as you would care to, and then people could come to you.
Yeah.
But you're not doing all that.
And some artists are successful doing that. They have a style and they have a certain subject that they do, and they have a certain look to their art, and people want that, and they come to them and say, we want you to do what you do, but here or in this way. I feel like I'm more of a commissioned illustrator, where I'll do, the client will have a need, and so we'll do all the back and forth with, okay, what exactly are you looking for? What colors, what theme, what's going to be the ultimate output of this? And then I'll do, what they need. So I have as I said, 2 young boys, and we're doing renovations in the house, and I teach and do a couple other commissions always. I'm sort of working on here and there. And so not a lot of free time for me to just go out and just do my own art. So doing this mural that we met at the wall the other day, that's actually just a treat. I'm finding time. I'm trying to find time to just go there by myself and just do it when I have just a couple hours here and there. So that's not normal, though. I'm usually just so busy being a parent and, just all the demands of being a teacher at a college that pretty much take up all my time. So,
but you do find artistic satisfaction in doing those commission pieces. There's enough room for your creativity and genius to come out.
Yeah, and sometimes I do. In the case of a mural I did recently in Ohio, I did it it was really just up to me. You know, there was a rooftop mural, and, you know, the guy that commissioned me, he knows that I'm into invertebrates, and he said, what ideas do you have for this? And so, you know, I did this little 3D. This is the model for the shadow and for the light and for the position of a a jumping spider that lives in kind of the Caribbean and the eastern seaboard. It's a very, very tiny spider. But yeah, I pitched him this creature to be on the roof of this building he has, and he was into it. And so I was really happy about that. So that's me getting to choose what I get to do, and hopefully that's the future where I can do more and more things like that are really subjects that I choose.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see where that leads.
Okay, now I'd like to ask you some profound, searching questions.
Oh, grab it.
Do you think about where you work as an artist is important? Are you a Northwest artist? Are you a West Coast artist?
I never think in terms of that. You know, I grew up in Western Washington, so, but now I've lived in Wenatchee for about 10 years, and so I definitely consider Wenatchee home. I don't know. I don't think in terms of my location, I guess, as much. I would love to just be gallivanting around the country and the world, doing murals or doing commissions all over the place. And so I don't know if where I live has an influence on the style of art that I do. Certainly for some of the subjects, you know, like I've done creatures that exist in this area. You know, I've rendered murals, let's say, for creatures that live here in Wenatchee or live in Washington in general or in Texas or where or whatnot. But I don't know. I don't think I'm bound by geography.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense to me. Okay, thank you. Because some people, I think, feel very rooted in a place and the place inspiring them. And I know that you are inspired by things in the valley, Wenatchee Valley, and the state of Washington. But I also do see you as having interests all over the world and different places you've traveled that you're inspired wherever you go.
Yeah, and I love the natural world. Obviously, I love where we live here in the Wenatchee Valley and all the beauty that's around. But also, you know, I love cartooning and I love doing surreal things and, you know, rendering things that don't even exist. And so that's just like a whole other realm too that doesn't reflect anything in this
might
area.
be a good time to talk about. Refer to some of this great artwork that's around us when you bring that up about things that maybe don't exist or whatever. Do you want to talk about, or things that exist in a way that you've rendered that we don't see every day? For instance, what I'm seeing behind you there.
Yeah, this here, this is also an opiliones or a harvestman. This is a kind of from the front view here, and you can see the little eyes up at the top there. I actually had access to a scanning electron microscope when I was at Western Washington University, where you have to kill a specimen, some insect or spider or little invertebrate, and then you coat it with this metallic coating, and then you know, it's different than a camera. It's not taking a picture, but it's like refracting the light back. And so that's when you see black and white photos that are so magnified, you know, it doesn't even look real. So I had access to that. And so I actually took a scanning electron microscope image of this harvestman, but then I used that later, the photograph that I took, the scanning electron microscope photograph that I took, I used that for the basis of this rendering. And the side of it was a little bit messed up, and of course it wasn't in a lifelike position like it is now. And so, yeah, I kind of had to recreate the position it would sit in, you know, if it was standing, you know, kind of like that, with the legs kind of heading upward there. So, yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of both. Really fun to do. The scanning electron microscope, I really wish I still had access to that. It's hard to give up that key.
It's nice to hear you talk a little bit about that process. And then what about this next one?
This one is just, I did a sketch I actually found my original sketch the other day from a few years ago. I don't know exactly. This has gone through a lot of different iterations as far as like what the idea was going to be, but it's not quite finished. But yeah, this is a sloth that's kind of being held against his will in a stock with an old battered key, and it's this kind of stormy, and it's made to look like he's a martyr basically, and it was ultimately, what I envision is a really giant golden frame with filigree, kind of looking like an antique sort of medieval painting or something like that. So I don't have a lot of explanation on that, but I really love this one. I like the perspective that I chose. I played a lot around with that. And doing the fur, of course, is really fun. And this is, painting with acrylics. I've painted with oil and I've painted with acrylic. And I kind of like the properties of both. So I may add oil paint on top of this base of acrylic in the future. But really fun to work this big. I just cut a big sheet of plywood up into 4x2 pieces. And it was fun to work in a vertical format. But yeah, it's, I wouldn't call this cartoony, but exaggerated. But yeah, it kind of has a cartoony look to it. It's kind of a playful look at a sloth. It doesn't look like a hyper-realistic sloth, but I kind of like to play with the exaggeration in the posture a little bit too. So he looks hopeless.
He does. I mean, that's a powerful piece.
Yeah, it's not an uplifting, happy painting.
What about this next one?
This here was something I did. So this is a depiction of this crossings that happened on the ancient Atlantic Ocean. So there's several species that exist in South America that didn't exist in South America up until I can't quite remember how many millions of years ago it happened. Probably in the 20s of millions of years ago. But there was this paleo current that kicked off of West Africa across, this is when the Atlantic Ocean was much, much narrower than it is today, and there was all kinds of volcanoes and archipelago islands in between. And this is the depiction of monkeys that crossed over and eventually settled and flourished in South America. So there didn't used to be monkeys in South America, and then there were. All in the fossil record, they just show up and they just proliferate. And so this, it's believed, I read a bunch of scientific papers about it. There's just a few about this sweepstakes dispersal. But there was, it's thought that there were monkeys that were sleeping in some mangroves or hanging out in some mangroves, and some rogue wave came up and just dislodged this raft of mangroves. And then they floated on this raft for days and inhabited an island. And that same thing happened on this island, to the next island, to the next island. And this is over, thousands of years or millions of years. And then eventually got to South America. So this is, again, something that there was no photographer there when these proto-monkeys arrived in South America. So it's just rendering what possibly it might have looked like, when they...
See, I love that. That's exactly the kind of thing, like this marriage of science and art that I began to learn about in your class. I mean, that story is terrific, and I think it's so interesting for people to think about that and think about that poor monkey who was out there on the floating wood.
Yeah, it happened to rodents and I think a type of rat and a few other things that exist in South America now too. So fascinating to think. And that's the geologic time thing. You're like, wait, the Atlantic was not nearly as wide, like it was much narrower, and there was islands in between and volcanoes. It's just crazy to think about,
It is. It's mind expanding.
Yeah.
I think. And then this.
And this here, this is another just absolutely fascinating thing to think about. This is based on this paper this guy wrote, Mark Jansen, I think was his name, Jansen. Where he had suggested that there's all these trees out in the world, especially in the tropics, that just litter fruit and they're not being, the seeds aren't being dispersed, they're just rotting at the base of these trees. And he came up with this idea, this theory that actually there's all these fruit trees that used to have a dispersal agent that would eat the fruit and then disperse the seeds. And so there's something called an Osage Orange. That was the first thing I did on this theme, where they, scientists now think that the Osage Oranges, which exist in Texas and kind of the South now, they were actually fed upon by giant ground sloths or some kind of an ancient horse, something like that. And now, the Osage Orange, they just fall on the ground and they just litter. This here are these, they're kind of a branch that are similar to elephants, but they're feeding on these, I can't remember what the name of this fruit is in the jungle, but also, they were, I don't know, maybe about this large, and I created a little clay head for these in order to get the shadow and whatnot right. But yeah, this is another example of an animal that fed on this fruit and would disperse it. And now these animals are extinct. There's no more ground sloths. There's no more of these creatures. There's no more of a lot of different animals that used to have a direct relationship to trees that would be their dispersal agents. And so this book is called Ghosts of Evolution. It's just about all the different tree species that have lost their dispersal agent. And again, thinking about geologic time, it's just impossible to comprehend. But the fact there's a lag in between when the animal dies out, but the tree still persists, and gives us an indication that it used to have some relationship that we're just trying to understand.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And you had us incorporate that in a project that we worked on. We were working in about illustrating a ancient creature, but then also you had us look into and research a plant that the creature would be feeding on.
Yeah.
I mean, it just was a different way of thinking about the world and time than I'd ever encountered before. It was super interesting.
And some of us in that, we're successful. You can find an article and say, okay, here's this dinosaur, and look, we found this kind of tree in its gut fossilized. Lucky for us. So now you know. But otherwise, some of the students in your class, they chose a certain dinosaur head that they wanted to sculpt, but the literature wasn't quite there. The science hadn't really, we know roughly what trees were there, but then they had to kind of take that leap and say, okay, well, based on, what I've read, is likely this tree or this shrub or this thing. We always did vegetarian animals. And so that was part of it too, just realizing there's limits to what we know and, making a best guess. Or
I liked that I found out that my Epiornis lived in Madagascar, and that plant that it fed on is still there, but it's a threatened plant.
Oh.
And actually, I discovered where it's on a big tropical plant website, and featured about this is extinct, only a few exist. And then they also had instructions about if you happen upon any of these seeds and put them in your garden, here's how you grow it. I mean, it was really shocking.
Please keep it alive. Yeah.
It was really shocking to me to see this contemporary evidence of this ancient symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. And we're just discovering more and more about them all the time.
Marlin, so I also want to ask you about your philosophy of art and the role you think art plays in our society and in the world.
That's a heavy question. I think for a lot of people, I instruct art. I guess that's where I spend most of my time, is on art instruction. For a lot of people, it's just really fun to render something and to be successful, to look at something with new eyes and really slow down and thinking about, how could I render this thing, or, how can I get the anatomy right of something, or how do I use the right color? And so for a lot of my students, I'd say the majority, they don't go on to become artists and have a career in art. But it's just a really rewarding thing to do, to really slow down and really physically make something, to produce something. And so most students that I interact with, I think that that's all they need from it, and that's what they get from it. But as far as like the role of art in the world, I guess it's, art is everything. It's music, and it's visual art, and it's dance, and sound, and everything else. This is just different people's interpretation of what they see, and when I really geek out on a tiny spider and want to sculpt it, and I just want to show it to the world, and like this is what I perceive. Like, I am absolutely fascinated by this thing. I chose this little spider that's, I don't know, it's a few millimeters long. It's so tiny. It's maybe 9 millimeters, but there's so much about its anatomy that's so fascinating to me that I just want to share it with people. And not everybody can get under a microscope, so it's just my way of just sharing it. And same with, when I create things that don't exist, or juxtapose surreal colors next to each other that aren't even representational. It's just me saying, look, I noticed this thing. I noticed these amazing colors that go together. Or look at this form that maybe I saw in nature, but still, I want other people to see it. And it's really fun if you can, just for a moment, get one person to recognize that. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Yeah, that's really terrific. Thank you very much, Marlin.
Oh, thanks for having me.
having
It's
this
been really fun.
conversation with me. Yeah, I really enjoyed it today. So thank you, Marlin Peterson, and thank you to the Icicle Creek Center for the Arts for allowing us to have this conversation today.
Thanks very much. It's a beautiful stage. It's great to be here.